Hey, and welcome to another video. In today's video, we will be talking about this huge plant next to me, which is the Philodendron Glorious, and I'm going to tell you how I take care of this plant and also how to get really big leaves, because it's really not that hard. It's a pretty low maintenance plant in my opinion. So let's get into the video. So I purchased this plant in February of 2022 and it was a small cutting at the time, and this is what it looked like. And in the last 2 years that I've owned it, I have chopped the bottom half of the moss pole, gotten rid of that, sold it, and extended the moss pole. I've done that twice, and the most recent one was in December, and since then it's grown these 3 top leaves over here. So it's pretty fast growing and it's still increasing in size with each leaf. So this one's still hardening off at the moment. It's a little bit floppy still, and I think it will be even bigger than the previous one, which is around 60 centimeters, I want to say. So that's pretty big, and I know that they can get even bigger than that. So while we're on the topic of big leaves, let's talk about how you can achieve them. So the most essential thing that you're going to need for this plant is a moss pole. And firstly, it's going to get you some really big leaves by using a moss pole. And secondly, it's a climbing plant. So the sort of growth pattern of this plant is going upwards. So imagine it's sort of climbing up along a tree rather than going across, which is a crawling plant. So we do need a moss pole for this plant, and the type of moss pole that you will use is also really important. You need to be using a moss pole that has substrate filled inside of it, so that way the aerial roots have something to climb into. There's 2 different types that work really well for this plant, which is a wire mesh moss pole and also a plastic moss pole. I personally like the plastic moss poles for a few reasons, because they are enclosed, so they hold a little bit more moisture in between watering. They're see-through, so you can see the aerial roots growing into them. And lastly, they only have sort of the surface area on the front where your plant can climb into. And if you have a wire mesh moss pole, it's a cylinder shape and it can attach anywhere onto that. So there's more chance of it sort of turning onto different sides of the moss pole, and it also has a lot more surface area for the roots to get tangled in. So they're just a little bit more fiddly in my opinion. So I would opt for a plastic moss pole. I would also just like to note, if you're wanting to use a Coco core type of moss pole, just don't ever use them. They're really terrible in my opinion. They don't really do a whole lot for your plant besides providing a sort of sturdy pole to grow against. It may put an aerial root here or there into it, but it's not actually giving a nice sort of substrate for the aerial roots to form into and actually build up a nice root system. So when you're growing your Philodendron Glorious, you need to always think about a big root system equals big leaves. So our moss pole is going to provide that big root system for it. And every time a new leaf starts to come through, it will start to form some aerial roots pretty early, which looks like this. So you always need to be giving it a moss pole so that way it can grow those aerial roots into. So this plant is essentially a cutting. I'll put a photo of what the base of the pot looks like, because the plant is sort of hovering over the top. So there's not actually any roots in the bottom. And if your plant is on a moss pole but it does have some roots at the bottom, when I would water the moss pole, I would make sure that the substrate down the bottom is getting a little bit watered, but you also want to make sure that it's in a soil mixture that's chunky, has great drainage and aeration, because when you water your moss pole and saturate it, there's a lot of water being held at the base. So now that we know that moss poles are really important for this plant, let's talk about how to water them. So you want to be making sure that you're watering from the top of the moss pole and allowing it to completely saturate and drain at the bottom. When checking if your plant needs to be watered again, I generally water all my plants at the 1 week mark. I just like to keep things simple, but if you wanted to see if the 1 week mark was a good point to water your plant or not, I would be checking the midway point of the moss pole. Reason being for this is because of gravity. Obviously the water is draining down through to the bottom, and the top of the moss pole is always going to be a little bit more dry than the bottom. So if we're checking the middle, it's just a little bit better of an indicator to work out if it's drying out or if it's still really wet. The lighting requirements for this plant are pretty high, and I think that it really enjoys a really bright, almost direct sunlight, and it really helps it to size up in leaf size. I have grown this plant before in just a grow light condition, and it wasn't decreasing in size with each leaf and it didn't look unhappy, but I think if you want it to have its sort of full potential, you definitely want to give it some really, really bright sunlight. Temperature and humidity I don't think really matters a great deal. I have grown this in a different house that had different temperature and humidity, and it was still sizing up with each leaf and just loving life in general. The only thing I will mention, I guess, which sort of touches in humidity, is don't touch the leaf when it is unfurling, just leave it alone. I have in the past opened up a leaf earlier than it would have liked because I'm not sure what I thought. I just wanted to open it up because I'm impatient. And the color on the leaf changes a little bit. So obviously opening it up earlier than it would have liked, it was receiving light sort of a little bit too quick. And you could actually see on the leaf a line where that was opened up to, and it was a different color to the rest of the leaf. So it looked really ugly, and it kind of stayed there the whole time. It didn't really adjust and fix itself up. So don't touch the leaf, it'll sort itself out. I have also given it a humidifier in the past to help a leaf open, and it didn't really change how it was opening up. So I think just leave it, and if you know that it's due for a water in like a day or two and a new leaf is unfurling, give it a water, and that's probably the best thing that you can do to help a new leaf unfurl. So this plant is pretty easy to take care of, pretty low maintenance. Just give it some really bright light, moss pole, water it regularly, temperature and humidity, whatever. That's about it really. It's pretty good. It's really rewarding because I don't do a whole lot for this plant, and it just continues to look beautiful. But there are two things that make this plant a little bit more high maintenance than just caring for it and letting it be. And the first thing is, because it's a velvet philodendron, it has a greater capacity to attract dust and debris, potentially pests as well. So you do want to be cleaning your leaves. There are a few ways to do this. You could just get a spray bottle and water, spray down the leaves, wipe it down, front and back also. I know the back's not that velvet texture, but if you're cleaning the leaf, clean the backside to minimize getting pests. The other one, which I kind of can't do anymore because it's a little bit too big, is just placing it in the shower and letting water run over it. I think that's a really great idea to clean your houseplants with because it's just easy, and it's almost like they're having a beautiful rainfall shower that they would probably love in its natural environment. So do that if you can, but like I said, this one's getting really big. And the last thing you can do, which is actually what I do, is I use a leaf cleaning product, and I use this one here, and I just spray down the leaves. I'm a little bit lazy with it. I would probably like to do it more frequently, but at this stage I kind of do every month. And I just spray them down with this leaf cleaning product and then wipe it down as well. So the biggest thing for this plant, with being a more high maintenance plant, is the way that it likes to grow is pretty stretched out, and it takes up a lot of space if you let it naturally do that. So this is what it looked like previously with its last chop of its moss pole, where I just let it do its own thing. And as you can see, it's pretty spaced out, and it did take up a lot of space because it's big and stretched out. So I can't do that anymore because it's getting bigger, and the spot that I have to grow it in does not have enough room for that. So what I do is I actually tie the petioles and the leaves into more of a compact shape. I will say that this is a little bit tricky. It's definitely, you need to sort of trial and error with it because it doesn't always want to follow your instructions. And I also think what you use for it is really important. So I use a plastic Velcro plant tie, and it does look kind of ugly, but the leaves do hide it pretty well. I think from what I can see in the viewfinder, you can only really see sort of one tie, but if I show you the moss pole sort of behind the leaves, it's really ugly and chaotic, but it's kind of just what needs to be done so that way it doesn't take over your entire house. This is the chaotic looking behind the scenes part of the moss pole. So as we get higher up and the leaves get bigger and stronger, we've just got a lot of Velcro going on. And as you can see, this one has pretty much changed shape. It's coming into a bent shape from the Velcro that we've used. So there's a few ways you can tie it on. So I've just literally got it around the petiole itself, and then some of them are just around the moss pole and sort of pushing the petiole against the moss pole. The other thing that is important with this is you want to tie your leaves when they're unfurling and they're a little bit more floppy. So if we look at this one here, it's much more floppy and I can maneuver it sort of however I need to, but lower down they are much more stiff and I can barely sort of push that at all. And this is some of the string I've used in the past that's holding on, but because it's more of a, I guess, a natural product than a plastic, it's going to disintegrate and you'll have to replace the string at some point. And I just find that they're a little bit more difficult to use. They can also damage the petioles, so I think the plastic works really well. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it encourages you to get a Philodendron Glorious for yourself. And I hope you can also just appreciate the effort that I went into to bring this plant up my spiral staircase into my upstairs part of my house, because it was a lot of effort, but we did it and we didn't break any leaves. So if you could like this video for that effort alone, that would be amazing. And I will see you in the next video.